Hello and welcome to the Tournament Poker Project. My name's John.
And I am Tain, the bad egg.
The bad egg. And we are two recreational poker players. And this is our learning journey to get good enough at poker to be able to have a proper stab, really compete, and maybe even win some tournaments at the World Series of Poker. Now, today's episode is a little bit different to usual. Obviously, usually we're talking about poker non-stop, analysing a hand. But today we're going to talk about and analyse BBC's The Traitors. So just a little spoiler alert. If you haven't watched Series 1 and 2 of the UK one yet, and you don't want it ruined, probably best that you turn this podcast off, go and watch the show and then come back, because we are going to be talking about players and things that have happened on the show. So I'm not sure exactly where the conversation is going to go, but I'm pretty sure it's going to spoil your show if you've not seen it. But this episode, although it's about the Traitors, might not differ to our usual format as much as you first think. So we'll still be talking about game theory and how that applies to the strategic battlefield. We'll still be using judgments, using incomplete information. It's still about deception, deceiving others for our own means. We'll be noting players' reads and gut feelings and tells on others, discussing adjustments needed for opponents who seem to have absolutely no grasp of how to play. Molly, I'm looking at you. And changing gears. So there's an early game and quite a distinct early game, mid game and end game, and maybe other parts of the game as well. You know, it might not be exactly split into those three, but it's similar to poker in that respect.
Yeah, just a quick note on that. So I'm going to reference the final table a lot because that is the point where things change. What I mean by final table is the period in the game show, the TV show, where either they're at 6 players or less, or at least they're approaching 6 players or less, because that is the tipping point where the Traitors are now making they're steering decisions, because they can either have a majority or they can command enough of the votes that they literally don't have to worry about getting through to the final. They can manipulate enough people. They've got enough people on their side. So whenever I talk about final table, that's what the period I'm talking about. It starts getting serious around 8 players, but it really kicks in at 7-6, and that is strategy change. And if you're a contestant and you haven't changed your strategy at that point, you are losing.
Definitely. Yeah, there really are those distinct sections, aren't they? And actually, I just want to say, Molly, apologies. You did great, but when Jazz voted to banish again, then you should have really gone, well, I might think they're both faithfuls, but statistically, why would Jazz do that if he knew both of us were going to end the game if he actually was a traitor? So you probably should have voted the love of your life, Harry. But anyway, we won't go into too much. Just to say, we are not professional poker players, not by a long way. We're going to be talking about game theory, but we're very new to it. And we don't pretend to know everything. Sorry?
We're not professional traitors. Just need to get that in there. We're not professional traitors either, or faithfuls.
Yeah, we're not professional faithfuls. We're not professional traitors or faithfuls. This is just our humble attempt to analyse the game of the Traitors in the same way that we do with the poker game. We'd love to hear your comments if you're listening in and you've got opinions on this and you've got ideas about the strategies that can be used and whatnot. Please do post. We'd love to see what you've got to say. So just top line, if you haven't watched The Traitors, or you're watching it and you haven't got a clue what you're watching, Traitors is just really top line. It's 22 players. They live in a house together for a couple of weeks. Several are secretly made traitors, so no one else knows they're traitors. The people that are made traitors do know they're traitors because they meet up every night, but the rest of the household are faithfuls. Each day there is a challenge which if they complete it or part of it, they get money that goes towards an overall prize pot, which the winner of the Traitors wins. Each day there's a round table. This is basically a bit of a chat, what's going on, trying to find out who the traitors are, and then everyone gets a single vote whoever gets the most votes is out. Just before they leave, they say if they're a traitor or a faithful. And then the last thing that happens each day is the traitors meet secretly after everyone else has gone home, and they conspire, they murder, they will choose someone to murder, who basically then just doesn't show up for breakfast the next day. That's the format. That is the format in a nutshell.
It's got Claudia Winkleman. That's an important factor.
Claudia Winkleman, I mean, yeah, she's not an essential part of the game. She does choose the faithfuls, and yeah, she definitely adds a certain something to the whole show, I think, which is great. All right then. Well, look, we know what the format is. Why don't we start off talking a little bit about the mindset that maybe the traitors should have in this game. So just to recap, the traitors, they need to survive. Every night they get to murder someone, and obviously their main thing is don't get found out that you're a traitor, because then you'll be banished and you'll be out of the game. So Tain, what should the traitors be thinking? What's like top line? If you're going in with a base strategy, what should they be thinking about?
So there's the way that traitors and faithfuls almost unanimously have the mindset that they go into it, even if they're trying to play a clever game, even if they're trying to do this or do that or maneuver, or they think they're being clever, they still show certain traits which are fundamentally a mistake, or that they might not be a mistake, but they don't know why they're good or bad. They're applying the wrong logic for it. So as an example, traitors, their fundamental mindset is please believe me. It's everything I say, I've got to try to justify it. I've got to try to tell you that I am telling the truth, because they're not. They also don't like too much scrutiny. They are, because they've got something they're lying about. So they're
it's horrible. It's horrible, and that's if I was a traitor, that's the part I would hate, is feeling on the spot all the time. And as soon as anyone talks to me, it's like, oh my god, are you gonna look me in the eye and say, "Oh, you're a traitor"? That would be tough. Yeah. And
it's exactly that. Their natural reaction is, I've got to bluff at this. I've got to. Please don't pay too much attention to me. Another one is the traitors tends not to buddy up with each other for that reason, even though everyone in the game has their little buddies and they collude and they share votes and everything like that. The traitors don't do it amongst themselves in front of others, because they'll think everyone will see through that and they'll know. It's almost a fundamental guarantee that the traitors are not close mates. You never see them walking around the house, all three of them together. They'll literally find one tiny time where they know they can get away with it, and then they'll have this big frank conversation. But they're very careful never to get caught.
It's weird. You know what? It's weird. Like, I remember seeing it a couple of times where two traitors were off walking together, or like sitting out in the garden, no one else was nearby, and they were sort of conspiring. And it's like, and they were like, oh, we best get back in. We don't want to be seen to be alone together. It's like, actually, it's a bit weirder that you're not ever, sitting together. And people don't know what you're talking about. And if they come over, just change the conversation casually, or continue talking about what you were talking about who you think traitors are, or who you're going to banish, or that's what all the faithfuls are doing. So if you really want to blend in, just carry on talking about who you think's a traitor, or who you're going to banish. It's in that sense it can be easier. It's just it's remembering not to reveal that you're actually a traitor. It's remembering to not talk about who you're going to murder that night, because obviously the faithfuls don't get to do that.
Yeah. And with the faithfuls, their tendencies and again, it's almost impossible for them to hide this, because it's coming from a position of honesty. And why would anyone want to change people's view of honesty? So anyone who's a faithful constantly lives in the moment of, I am faithful, I am honest, I can say whatever I want. And that is a fundamental failure, because it's been proven not to work, because you're not actually convincing anyone that you're honest. You're just being you. What you need to do is convince people to think in a certain way. and that isn't to think that you're a traitor, and that isn't to think you're a faithful. It's to put enough doubt in their mind that they don't care. But we'll get onto that later. So the other one is, I'm a goodie. A big thing about faithfuls isn't a subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, entitlement. I'm honest. I deserve that money. That's my money.
Yeah. But I am a faithful. I've always been honest about that since the beginning. It's like, well, there's a hell of a lot more to the game than just being a faithful, right? If you're just a faithful and no one's voting to banish you, then you become a bit of a target to be murdered. So as a faithful, I think it's actually, especially in the early game, I think it's actually really probably tougher being a faithful. I think you don't know when you're going to get murdered. The traitors murder a little bit more at random at that stage. It doesn't seem to be as, really strategically, right, we're going to pick this person. You kind of need to pretty quickly give the traitors a reason not to murder you. And I don't know, I don't want to go saying it because it's not great at the round table, but if people are a little bit suspicious of you and the traitors know that, then at the round table, if you're even getting maybe 1 or 2 votes and then someone else goes out, you're not going to get murdered. The traitors get rid of people that are strong, leader types. And if you're getting votes to be banished, they won't waste a murder on you. They'll be like, well, you might get banished at some point anyway. So it's tricky, but you, as a faithful, early on, you almost want to be under a little bit of suspicion, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes, the key component is it's the right kind of suspicion. So there are many different types of ways that people can be suspicious of you. If someone believes you've said or done something that fundamentally shows dishonesty, that's it. I think you will find it very difficult to undo that. Whereas putting enough doubt into someone by, for instance, association, or by saying something, or putting doubts in people's minds, but not in a way that's, it's not that you are being a traitor, it's not that you aren't being a traitor, but
they're just not sure. They're just not
sure.
sure.
You're talking about the game in a different way, or you're going about things, you're being a bit too quiet, but then all of a sudden you're very chatty. But there's good reason for it. It's kind of that, I'm not sure why they're doing it. I'm sure they've got a good reason for it. I've got nothing else to base it on, so I'll vote for them now. But the other part of the game is that you then sort of provide them with answers, but also more questions. And it's that kind of doubt that's essential for survival.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe as well, and this works, I think, as a traitor or a faithful, you could maybe try and really target who's going to be suspicious of you, instead of just like big group setting where everyone can see you start, doing something that's maybe causes a little bit of suspicion. What if you go, right, I'm going to get this particular person to be a bit suspicious of me, or these 2 people to get a bit suspicious of me, and do something to make those particular 2 suspicious of you, but no one else, and almost act a little bit differently on occasion around those 2 people, and then just be very lovable, he's definitely a faithful in front of everyone else. I think that can work as a faithful and a traitor. I think as a traitor, when you've got a little tiny bit of suspicion on you, and maybe someone votes for you, and if they keep voting for you each day, the same person, but then that person doesn't get murdered, well, it kind of does you a favor as a traitor. It's almost like, well, if Tain, who keeps getting voted as, to be banished by Jazz or whoever, then, it's unlikely that Tain is a traitor, because Jazz has not been murdered, and Jazz keeps going on about Tain being a traitor. So it kind of, that can work in your favor if you play that way of doing it.
Yeah, I'd give the example of a bad move would be using the word murder instead of banishment. That is literally putting a nail in your own coffin in this game, because people, no matter how much of a mistake that was and how easy that is to make that mistake, especially in the first day or 2, if you say murder instead of banishment, you're out. However, if you're talking to someone and someone else walks up and you just go and then walk off, they don't know what you're talking about. There's absolutely no reason why that should be traitor behaviour, but that person ain't going to like it, and that person's going to think that was unusual. Maybe he's a traitor, but no one else is going to care about that, because when you tell the wider group, oh yeah, he just stopped talking as soon as I walked up, they're like, he's just talking about you. That's a normal behaviour. But that person's going to hate you for it, and they're going to put your name down, and that is that kind of subtle. You're never going to get in too much trouble for it. No one's ever going to be able to pin it on you as a fundamental, you are a traitor, but it's enough that someone there down.
I like that. Just quick, he's here. Don't talk about it anymore. But if you do, that's great. And if you combine that with just doing that kind of weird behaviour with that one or two people that aren't real leader types, that aren't going to convince everyone else that you're a traitor. You need to pick people that are maybe a little bit more reserved, a little bit, maybe socially awkward, or, quieter. People that aren't going to get the whole group against you. You just want them voting again, maybe to banish you.
Yeah, and that's it. So some of the other mindsets that a faithful has, you often see them saying things like, how can this be a traitor behaviour? I'm not a traitor, and I'm the one behaving that way. That kind of disbelief.
Disgust. Yeah, like what? Like, what are you talking about? You're completely wrong, because I am a faithful, and this is just how I'm acting. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And the very next one's exactly like that as well. It's like they take things very personally.
Yeah.
Because they have this sense of entitlement. I am faithful. I am honest. I'm not normally honest, but today in this game, I am honest. You've got to believe me. How dare you accuse me of being a traitor? And even though a traitor might try to act that kind of disbelief, it's never the same, because there's just no genuine. It's not genuine behaviour. It's faked, and it's quite easy to tell when you, at least when you're sitting at home, it's easy to tell the difference between someone who's constantly attacked personally. So anyone who seems to go after people's characters, seems to get really defensive at the same things that everyone else is perfectly fine with. A good example from this season was Anthony and Jasmine. They both seem to get very defensive and sometimes quite personal and quite aggressive. I think there was a few others as well that just got really aggressive when someone attacks them, and they'd go back after that person as well. I think Anthony did pick out a few targets, to be fair. I'm being a bit unfair to him. But that kind of personal attack, how dare you? Oh, that was the one. Sorry, the Scottish guy who was called a sheep was deeply hurt by that as well. And it was that personal element to it. And it's like, it's just a game, mate. But a traitor wouldn't ever be personal like that, because they know they're not the person that people are seeing, because they're lying. They will never take things personally. So even though that's not a tell, oh, you didn't take that personally, you must be a traitor. It's the opposite. It is a confirmation that someone wouldn't behave that way if they were a traitor. And it's that kind of little subtlety that would never make sense for a traitor to do, that starts indicating, you build these little things up. A faithful would always do this. A faithful would always do that. There's certain behaviours that they always do. Like, for instance, I mean, it's a part of the later bit, but the challenges is a great one, where traitors will always go for a shield because they've always got that motivation. So unless there's a good reason, they're not going for it. Like it's a physical challenge and they're not the most physical of people, they'll go for that shield. Whereas there'll be a lot of faithfuls who they're like, look, no one's put my name down. There's absolutely no benefit with me going for that shield. I mean, some still do go for it. Again, it never tells you that someone is a traitor, but you can start eliminating people, or you can start saying, okay, so I've got 21 people. Probably, as you start whittling it down, it will go down, 17, 16 people. Half of them, I've got a 50% certainty that they're a faithful. And that's significant, that you're saying, I'm certain that, well, I'm 50% sure, compared to 0% for the rest of it. So then you don't want to lean on them people because they're faithfuls. They've got nothing to offer you. It's the traitors that you want to find, but not for the reasons that people think, which is moving on.
Yeah. So that was kind of the fundamentals. Let's dig it then, Tain, into how do we ensure survival? And maybe we start with early game here. How do you survive? We've mentioned a couple of things there about faithfuls not being on the traitors target for murder. Maybe we could explore that a little bit more. But what else is there we need to be thinking about to ensure survival early on as a traitor or a faithful? I think it's a big part of it is about not getting banished, isn't it?
It is. So let's go direct into our poker analysis. So for me, the way to survival is protecting your value. And a big thing I want to say here is that the fundamental mistake that everyone seems to play is that they think weaning out the traitors is beneficial. I don't have a clue why so few people, or no one, as far as I remember, has ever mentioned that it is totally pointless. Getting rid of them traitors, they're murdering people, but what happens when you call out a traitor? They just recruit someone. It doesn't shorten the game, that you don't get an extra murder. You need every single one of them faithfuls to go out until the end game. They have to. It's a requirement of the game that unless you get absolutely fluky and you manage to find all the traitors who haven't then recruited, and in fact, the recruitment means it's almost impossible to keep ahead of it. You will need to be fundamentally excellent. And it's, as much as that's likely, you might as well treat it as an impossibility because the recruitment can happen.
And it's just like the early stages of poker. When you're playing a multi-table tournament, you're not sitting there trying to take people out. That's not, yes, take them out, but the main objective is to get chips, build a stack, is to survive. Yeah.
Yes.
It's the same in that respect. Taking someone out, you're in a 100-seater poker tournament, taking someone out early doors, why is that a benefit? Especially if to get that traitor out, you've got to be really vocal, you've got to try and rally people, convince them that person's a traitor. All that's going to do is get you murdered, and then you're out of the game. You need to survive. Early stage, 100% on board with that. Let's survive. You don't want to be a sheep, but you do notice actually the really quiet players do tend to survive murder in the very early stages. People that aren't really talking much at all, they're on no one's radar. The traitors don't think to murder them. The traitors really just go for, it's a little bit more on gut. It's a little bit more, or less complete information at the beginning. So they are going for people that they just think are big characters that might show potential to be able to rally troops, and go against them, or people they think are particularly smart or good game players. Like you won't want to be playing poker pros in the traitors. You don't want to play really good game players. Just in general, as a faithful or a traitor, you don't really want fantastic opponents. So your game early on is about survival. Don't stand out too much. Don't get yourself banished. Don't get yourself murdered, and don't worry about taking the traitors out.
Yeah, I mean, the recruitment is probably the worst part of the game for the faithfuls, because it's literally like sitting at a table playing against a whale, all of their tells, and then all of a sudden someone whispers in their ear that you're bluffing them every single time they've got a river and they've missed, and they shut up shop and they're a completely different character, and everything you ever wanted, every bit of value you were getting from leaning on them. So for instance, you've got a pretty good idea the traitors are. So you're sitting on their shoulder, you're being a yes man, you're agreeing to what they're having, you're agreeing with the targets they're going after, you're being a bit of a patsy to them, and then you vote them off. So then someone else who you're certain was a faithful turns on you because they're the person that you were, setting up accusations for earlier as a different part of the game. All of a sudden you've gone from hero to zero. It's just such a bad part of the game for the faithfuls. I don't know why they don't realize this and realize how undesirable it is. Just people are going to get murdered. Live with it. It has to happen anyway.
That being said, Tain, as a faithful, you do need to be seen to be trying to find the traitors.
Yes.
You couldn't let this you couldn't let others on to your strategy here. You couldn't go in there, saying to people, we don't need to find the traitors, just survive. Like, it's certainly not something you can be doing. People will want to see that you're going for the traitors. A lot of the people in there are going to be, right, we're faithfuls. Our objective is to get the traitors out from day one, work out who they are. So again, going back to no one wants to play really strong opponents. If you start talking about strategies or showing that you're not bothered about getting the traitors out as a faithful, people are going to think, damn, this is a good player. And they may just banish you based on that.
Yes. So this is when it comes into what I describe as very similar game theory, where your survival is to not get rid of the traitors, but your survival is also to build like alliances, but while still staying under the radar. You should be making accusations, while also them accusations not really going anywhere. And all of that is done by creating levels of doubt and levels of alliance across, not friendships. Like, so you don't just make really close, nice best mates. As much as that's not going to hurt you, that's no part of the game. Your mates will not save you. If they think you're a traitor, they'll turn on you, like on they'll do a 180 and all of a sudden your head's on the chopping block. So it's not beneficial to have close friends. What you need is alliances across friendship groups, which is particularly important early on when there's a lot of these friendship groups. So one of the things that's key to that is surviving scrutiny, which is what we said. So every time you accuse someone in a way that is tailored to have this little bit of scrutiny, so that someone is questioning you, so they can never say, well, no one's ever said that you're a traitor, you're just sitting there, getting away with it. It's like, no,
you can say, no, he did, he told me.
Yeah. He's been saying I'm a traitor the whole time. Like, so surviving scrutiny is essential. The only people who don't need scrutiny are the people that get done over right at the end, because the traitors kept them by their side just for the purposes of screwing over. Sorry, Molly, probably what happened. Alliances, though. So every time you've said, John, got a feeling you're a traitor, mate, I saw you do that thing the other day, or every time I see you, I'm like, all right, John, and then walk off and not say anything, that kind of suspiciousness, and then I'll put your name down on banishment. Every time you do that, you should make a random alliance with someone that you don't really talk to. It's like, John, you keep behaving in this way, but I don't see Dave acting that way, and I don't see Sharon acting that way. And Dave and Sharon are in earshot, and they're like, oh, I haven't said a word to Martin yet. All of a sudden, he's calling me a faithful, and he's got my back. What an unusual, nice thing that he's done there. And that's their only feeling of you. Their only feeling is, Martin called me a faithful. Why on earth would I want to get rid of him? Because that's not a normal trait of behaviour to have. So they're alliances, and you have to have more of them than you ever make accusations. 2 or 3 alliances. Some you can pick the same people, as long as others can hear that and they can say, oh, I like that he's doing that. Don't randomly spatter it, but that kind of building small alliances is essential, because they will talk to others. So when someone G's up and saying, Martin was a dick, couldn't stand him, he pushed me out the way in the challenge, I'm going to vote for him tonight. That person who you called a faithful is like, oh, I don't know, I've not seen that from Martin, I think he's all right. And they've got your back without ever having to do any extra work, because they've got no other reason to doubt you. Why would a traitor go around calling people faithfuls? It just makes no sense. But it does, because that is one of the essential parts of covering up what you're doing, which is not finding the traitors on purpose, deliberately being that rotten egg, which I said is what I would be. So I'd love to do it, just to be the traitor on the inside, traitor by another name.
So just explain, what is the rotten egg?
The rotten egg is the person who seems to be, they are a faithful.
They are a faithful.
But they're specifically not finding traitors. They're being a terrible faithful, as they would normally call it. Their only ambition is to win the game, and they know they need to do that by not voting out the traitors. So if a traitor's name gets called up, it is feasible that they could try to turn the conversation elsewhere. Now, that is a very delicate situation, and it's probably better just to let that fire burn. But if the opportunity arises and it's subtle enough, that wouldn't be the worst thing, because you know that if that Traitors, you're sitting by their side and you've got their ear and you know what their moves are and you can see what they're doing, that is just so valuable. That is such a good place to be. And if that person gets voted off, starting that all over again simply might not be possible. So it might be in your favour to defend that person.
Do you think, just something you said a bit earlier, do you think Ross from season 2 was playing that game where he was knowingly banishing faithfuls?
Possibly,
because he was very good. I mean, he seems like a real game player, a real intelligent guy, and he was good. You know, people would follow him as well. He was one of these kind of ralliers. It just maybe, and I don't know if he'd ever admit it, or I certainly didn't sort of show it on the show, but he did seem to really go after faithful sometimes, and we knew he was a faithful at the time, and maybe he knew he was doing that and thought, yeah, but if I do that, I'm not going to get murdered. Like, I felt like he was good at that.
Yeah,
and it could be a possible strategy that he was employing, and I think he's got the head for it as well.
Yeah, but then Ross also made the biggest mistake I've ever seen in the Traitors. He went from winning to losing in a simple manoeuvre that he missed, and Harry was smart enough to do the opposite and won. Which was that night when they recruited Ross, and he subtly knew he was going to go for the jugular and he wanted to attack Harry. The only thing, and I said immediately when they recruited him and he accepted, I said to my wife, he needs to go down that morning, no matter what they've spoke about, no matter what their strategy is, and say the Traitors tried to recruit me last night, and I said no, that, and then leave it at that. Whether he's, and just lie, and he could still sell that to Harry and was it Andrew?
Yeah.
There we go. He could still sell that as a part of the tactic, because then he's a traitor on the inside. He could get away with it enough that it would have completely demolished every angle that Harry had, and it would have meant that Harry didn't have anything hanging over Ross. So there was already, it was back to a fair fight. Ross didn't do that. Ross gave Harry the tools to dismantle him, unfortunately.
And I mean, fair play to Harry. I think that guy owned it the series 2. I was really rooting for him in that evil kind of, come on, you know, when you root for a traitor kind of way. I thought he was brilliant.
He did get lucky, but he was very well. He was lucky in finding the shield, but let's not take away from the fact that his use of that was superb. That was utter brilliant thinking, and he deserves the credit he gets for that.
He's strategic. He was really strategic.
But but people won't be able to replicate that in future series, because A, they'll probably take away that opportunity, or B, they just would never be that lucky that the only person who saw him nick it is the person who he's very close with and who would keep a secret till their deathbed if he asked. That's just such a rare scenario for that to have happened in that way, especially as one of the other girls almost found that shield and they missed it by an inch. Hence he found it so easily. And if that hadn't have happened, I reckon his name would have come up. But more credit to him, he might have come up with other smart ways. If he's capable of sussing that one out and sussing it out well, he could have been capable of sussing something else out.
He was strategic, but he was also very convincing that he was a faithful. He just played. He's one of those intelligent guys that just plays a bit dumb, right? So I think there was one that Jazz kind of called him out, like nearer the end game, nearer the final table, and Jazz called him out on something that Paul had said to him, and his response. And Jazz was completely right. I'm trying to think exactly what it was, but it really kind of, you couldn't really explain it coherently. But Harry doesn't need to. Harry's playing dumb. So Harry would just say, well, you know, like there was a lot of accusations being thrown about that night from Paul, and I don't really understand it, but you know, and it's just this playing dumb, and it's like, well, hang on, you don't understand it, but this is what you said, and that doesn't make sense. But it didn't matter. Harry's just but I'm a faithful, you know. But it wasn't playing too dumb. It was playing just the right amount of dumb for people to just lay off him.
Yeah, he had a spell over people at that point because that was when Jazz said, Paul said to me, blah 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 blah. I think he said if I get bumped, it's this person, and then Harry told someone else, and it's like there's no way Harry could know unless he was also a traitor. Like it was like really solid, concrete evidence.
It was like
as long as you believe Jazz. That was the other thing. It was word of mouth, and that might have been the thing that discredited it enough. People just didn't want to believe that Harry was a traitor, but it was evident. People were believing all nature of ridiculousness, like they always do in this game. So the flags were there, and that was a significant one, and it just got brushed underneath the carpet. And all credit to Harry. So yeah, just getting back into what else ensures survival, just to keep us back on track a tiny bit. Yeah. You mentioned this, making small accusations that don't go anywhere. That's really important. They have to be low level. You need to keep it persistent, but don't change that up. The one big traitor error, I think Ash made this one incredibly badly, is flip-flopping or trying to drum up votes, things like that, which maybe we can go on to next. The things that faithfuls definitely don't do, but also the things that faithfuls do that almost guarantees they're going to get voted off. The things you should never do, which probably aren't anything to do with poker. Well, some of them do have a crossover. But
do tell. Have you got any examples?
So right, you've mentioned quite a few of these. Being too smart is you're just getting out there. I'll be really honest, I am surprised at how long. I can't remember his name now. The really smart one, yeah, glasses, short hair, spoke quite posh. Not Ross, the other one. Zach. Very surprised at how long Zach lasted, and Charlotte.
He was really suspicious, wasn't he? He was so suspicious, and he was a faithful, but he just had this way about him. It's almost this kind of sly kind of like it's like I'm a traitor.
Well, this is it. The way they edited it is they never paid attention to some of the things he was saying, but he was incredibly smart. One of the few people I've ever heard on the TV say about how you build up percentages on how smart people are and how likely people are. Like he said, I'm never 100%. And some people are like, how can you not be 100%? If you're not, like as though you must be a traitor because you haven't got a stupid gut feeling. Like, it's a ridiculous statement. But he was like, no, you have to build this up as a picture and it gets bigger and bigger. And at the moment, I'm only 30% for that person. That's a fair thing. But if I'm only 10% for everyone else, they're the most likely in my book. But they're still only 30%. People like argued that, and I'm like, that's baffling. That is like actual logical deduction.
It's like the saying goes, they're guilty until you find someone else who's slightly more guilty.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's so being smart is one of the obvious ones. You just become such a target. But do you know what I find is incredible is how being annoying guarantees you will get voted off, despite the fact it guarantees you're a faithful. I don't think there's ever been a super annoying, super loud, super aggressive person who is also a traitor, because it is just not the behaviour you want. They can be a bit outlandish and they can be a bit forwards and they can be a bit, hell yeah, I'm a cool guy or something like that. I think there was is it either Australian or the American one, he was a bit leery, but he was never annoying to the point people were like, I just can't deal with him anymore. The faithfuls will genuinely invent any reason they want to say, look, we've had enough. And I think some of them are actually smart enough to go, we know they're not a traitor, or we just want to get rid of them. We're willing to give up a banishment and just.
But like we're saying, it doesn't matter. You don't early on, don't go for the traitors. Don't worry about it. Like they can just top up to get another traitor recruited anyway. Just vote people off you don't like or that are too smart and they're going to beat you later on. Like get them out. Don't worry about the traitors. Just get whoever out.
Yeah. Vote hunting. I mentioned that earlier, which is what Ash was doing, going around trying to drum up support, flip-flopping. When you realise the person's name who you said isn't getting any traction, then picking out someone else who everyone else is saying, that's just silly. That's just never going to work. Silly. Because you seem too confident about nothing. Doesn't work. Constant deflection is not a good trait either. And that doesn't necessarily mean being a traitor, but it is a natural trait of behaviour. But the people, faithfuls who constantly deflect, it's just like, well, that's just the same kind of thing as a traitor would do.
To counteract that, what I would say is, when we're saying don't just constantly deflect, replace that with, I think, just being a bit vulnerable. If you're a traitor, allow yourself to be vulnerable. People are going to question you. It's going to make you nervous. It will make you nervous if you're a faithful, because they've only got your response to go by. They've only got your words and the way you're acting when they ask you to go by. And as a faithful, you might act like, oh no, I'm not a traitor, just as much as if you were you actually were a traitor. As a traitor, if you're put on the spot, just allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable and say, it makes me feel uncomfortable being asked that. Like, obviously, I don't want you to think I'm a traitor. Like, I'm not one. It's deflecting and avoiding that vulnerability looks very suspicious.
Yeah, 100%.
It's almost like trying to force someone. It's almost like trying to say to them, stop thinking I'm a traitor. Stop thinking, oh, look over there. Look over there. Look, there's a traitor. It's playground tactics.
100%. That you need scrutiny. You have to have survived. You have to have survived it, as well as just for the natural human trait of resolution. If I said, John, I think you're a traitor, and then we kind of move past that, and I actually draw a line under it, I won't just think, okay, John survived that scrutiny, I'll scrutinize him again if something comes up. I'll give that way too much credibility in future scenarios, and I'll start ignoring things like with Harry. He definitely benefited from this, where people were ignoring blatant facts in favor of, he got rid of all these traitors. And it's like, the numbers are adding up. Like, how could there be this many traitors that you voted off if they're not being recruited by someone who you're not voting off? Like, someone's pulling the strings here, yet you can't see the wood for the trees. And it's that, for surviving scrutiny is essential. So people who deflect, people who are desperate, who act erratically, who act annoyingly, who seem to start clutching at straws. Anyone, I'm going to say this as a joke, but I mean it wholeheartedly because it is every single series. Anyone who shows sound, reasonable logic over gut feelings and emotion, just people hate it, and I don't get it. And I see some of them trying to discuss strategic logic, and it just doesn't work. People just go on a gut feeling. You're using logic, you must be a traitor.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of, it works for them. It works in their favor because you might be a traitor, but even if you're not, they're getting rid of opponents that are cleverer than that they are.
Yeah. Trying too hard and too little in challenges. You've mentioned this to me before, like, and it's a big trait. Like, over trying and under trying.
Yeah, just give it a good go. Be part of the team.
Yeah. Don't
stand out too much.
I'm trying to work out if a part of that with the traitors trying too hard is this trying to show that they're faithfuls by how much they're trying, as well as they also have a bit more entitlement to, there's only a few of us and we're being deceptive and great and we're doing all these murders, so we've got a much better chance of winning that cash, so I actually care about how much is there. Whereas if you're one of like 13 faithfuls and you've got nothing to stop you getting picked, kind of thing, like, you're there thinking that money's so far away, as much as 40 grand and 50 grand is a big jump in real life terms, it's nothing to me when I'm miles away from it. You know what I mean? I might not even be seeing that money.
It's still survival at that point, isn't it? It really is. It is until, much nearer the end.
Yeah. Never accusing anyone apart from the patsies. So someone who manages to pick a traitor and then does everything, does their bidding for them, and it has to be blindly. They don't know they've picked a traitor. They've just made a mate, but they believe them to hell and back, despite the fact that they actually are a traitor. Anyone else, if you're not accusing people, at some point you're going to get fingered and pointed at and said, that's traitor behaviour. Why are you never picking someone? And again, I'm not sure about why that's the case, because traitors, it's in their interest to do that. But people start clutching at straws when they get desperate and never picking someone, or not being 100%, or flip-flopping, they might see it as, you've been quiet all the time, why do you never pipe up? It's like, I'm an introvert. Like, is that too hard for you to believe? But
yeah,
that must mean they're a traitor. How dare they be an introvert?
yeah.
And also, this is my favourite one, because this is poker, showing any body language ever, because people have no ability to see a behaviour and realise that whatever they assume that to mean is a complete wild jump. Yes, you've spotted a behaviour, but that has no bearing on your conclusion. So I don't get why you think they're two in the same thing. A good example of this is the number of times you can't look me in the eye. You must be lying. It's like, I've got ADHD. I cannot look people in the eye. I really struggle with it. Not because I don't like looking people in the eye. It's because when I look people in the eye, I literally lose my focus. I start looking at the nose. Am I looking at them too hard in the eye? I've been looking at them in the eye for 3 seconds. Was it 4 seconds I meant to and then look away? Should it be 15 seconds? What if I start crying? Am I meant to blink? And I've learned to not look people in the eye so I can continue a conversation and not think about what's going on in their eye. And heaven forbid they've got like a little bit of sleep or something. All of a sudden I'm staring at them in the eye thinking,
that's why I like talking to people on online, because where their camera is and where they're looking at your face, you might be in the corner of their screen. So often, like, you're talking to people that are looking at you like this, and then you can talk to them. It's like, this is great. We're not actually making that real direct eye contact, but it's not my fault. It's not my fault. You're looking at the corner of the screen.
But out of what we got, 15 banishments per episode per season.
Yeah.
13 of them, 12 of them will be based on completely irrational conclusions from
and irrational conclusions derived by like two people, sometimes 3, and then just everybody else, the sheep, just jump on because they haven't got any of their own kind of, they've not derived anything for themselves. It's just like, it's almost like they've gone in and like, oh, I don't know. Oh, everyone's saying that person, right, I'm going to vote them as well then. It's irritating, but it's the way the game works, those people are getting people out.
Was it was it the UK one, or it might have been the Australian one, and I'm getting confused because it was right at the early stage where someone said they overheard someone else say about, oh, I'm going to murder them tonight, and they just wouldn't let it drop, and they brought it up through 8 different banishments, and it turns out that they didn't say that, and both people were faithfuls, yet they just wouldn't ever let it drop. And it's like everything they started to ascribe into it, and we were all sitting at home thinking, that didn't even happen. We know you're both faithfuls, so of course it didn't happen.
It's the poker equivalent of someone maybe like doing some massive bluff on the river and getting paid for it, and then showing everyone, look, I bluffed you with absolutely nothing, and then just assuming that any big bets on the river by that person are bluffs, and losing a lot of chips to them, but just still mindlessly insisting, no, that's what they do, that's their thing. You need to, it's going back to what you were saying about Zach, you can't ever be 100% sure. It's incomplete information. You take a piece of information, it goes in, but other information are going to affect it. If we're looking at hand analysis, what we reduce a range to earlier on, yes, later on we still need to say, well, we're still only left with this range. So when we're looking at the traitors, yes, there'll be information that you've got that other piece of information might contradict, but you kind of need to hold both as true and just gauge, well, does that make them more definite to be a faithful or a traitor? The whole thing open to new information, new data, and don't get stuck on silly stuff that's happened once or has just been said. Like you say, someone's saying murder once, they might have even said it, or if they did, it might have just been an accident. Don't base what you're doing on silly kind of less.
It reminds me of down the pub, the local game I play. There was a chap who doesn't play like that now. I think we've trained him otherwise, but he just couldn't bluff. He had no bluffs. When he got to the river, even to the turn, but when he got to the river, if he ever raised you, you throw your cards away. He will call with bluffs, but if he was raising, just get out of there. And then this one time he's obviously raised, but everyone's like, oh God, we'll throw away. And then he's turned over a bluff, and we're like, oh, where'd that come from? He's like, oh, that's desperate for a win. He just didn't have time. That was it. And he went back to never bluffing again. But it was, it's just that kind of, it means nothing because circumstances can completely alter what the behaviour was.
Yeah.
And it's drawing conclusions from that are fundamental to the game is ridiculous. Whereas if I said, okay, you never bluff because I've seen it 8 times that you've never bluffed, and that's the only 8 times I've seen, I'm going to give it 60% weight, which is a lot. That means I believe you're most likely to be a traitor, and I'll see what else I can. I'm going to build it up with other attributes. I'm going to build it up with who you voted for, who you didn't vote for, how many times you've switched your vote, that kind of who you've got alliances with, and if you ever voted within your alliance, then I'm going to use that for the other 40% until I'm pretty certain. That saying one thing and putting that as 0 or 100 is critically the worst thing you could ever do if you genuinely wanted to find who the traitor was. It's just bad poker.
Absolutely. It's a little bit like, again, relating this to poker, when you assume that someone's got a very specific hand that you're playing against and kind of going, right, well, I'm putting them on ace queen, so I'm ahead of that, so I'm going to go for it. No, like, you need to put them on their range. There's hands that you beat and there's hands that you don't beat. Same with traitors. There's things that make them more likely to be a traitor and things that make them more likely to be a faithful, and then less of both as well. So yeah, accept that incomplete information and work with it. Let it build a picture, and then when the equity's in your favour, make your vote if it's the best you've got at the time.
Cool. Did you want to start looking at how we can put together that incomplete information? I think we started that conversation already, which is why I think that might move into piecing that together and using different elements of perhaps game theory to influence it.
So how do we use the incomplete information and game theory?
So directly relating to the game show is picking out the actual concrete information. In poker we've got 2 cards. We know exactly what our cards are, but that's not concrete information in relation to our opponents. But we know what the community cards are. We know what their checks are, their folds are, their raises, their bets. That's concrete information, and we can associate that with reads. But the fact that certain things you just wouldn't naturally do in certain situations means you can draw fairly strong conclusions from it, which are enough to benefit your game. And it's the same with this. The concrete information comes from things like the banishment votes, the murders, alliances, how they behave in challenges, how they change behaviours in different circumstances. So, and what I mean by that is every time you've been accused, John, you've been open about it and said, that's fine. Like, I can understand people accusing me. Here's my explanation for that. Here's what I'm going to do about that. Here's you give the usual spiel of why that might be wrong, but you're not too overly, I'm going to get accused. I've got no problem with that. I'm happy with that. And then all of a sudden we think there was a recruitment, and then when you're accused, you're deflecting. That's a change in behavior that you're doing, and that you might not say that's definitely because you were recruited, but something has changed your behavior, and that is a concrete piece of information. Your behavior's changed. Why that's changed, you don't know. And then that's when you start piecing together, well, actually, John changed his vote last night as well. Why would he have done that? Also, John, for the first time ever, went for a shield. Why would he do that? And this is the kind of little bits that we're like, okay, so now we're starting to say, even if only they were just 10% meant that you could possibly be a traitor, and only 5% faithful, because you might still do that behavior in faithful, but we've now got 5 different things. So we're possibly looking at 50% chance you're a traitor, 25% faithful, 25% unknown. And for me, that would be as much as you're ever going to get on someone.
Yeah.
And it's building that incomplete information from that concrete thing. Votes really do matter. And one key thing is that traitors do not flog a dead horse. If I'm a traitor and I put your name down and no one else goes with me, I don't put your name down the next day. It just doesn't make any tactical sense unless I know the next day people are going to vote with me. I would not put your name down 2 nights in a row.
Why? I'm not sure I understand that one. So if you're a traitor and you vote for someone that no one else votes for, what's the harm in the next day voting for them again? I'm still think it's this person. To me that's not a terrible tactic, because
it's a good tactic.
Yeah.
It's more you're picking out what other people's tendencies are likely to do. So you would be good to do that. That wouldn't be a mistake. However, people don't do that. When they're traitors, they are trying to manipulate people and they're trying to puppeteer conversations and lure people to vote each other, maybe start a few fires between each other. So the only time they vote for someone that no one else does is to kind of take themselves out of that situation and let people fire off against each other. But when that doesn't happen, they can't go around saying, you thought John's a traitor, and then say to this person, what about John being a traitor? And then they hold up Martin. Everyone's going to say, you just went round everyone trying to drum up for John and then jumped out when the boat started to sink. What's going on there? You know what I mean? Like, that's not normal. And traitors won't continue to vote for the same person with no backing, because it serves no strategic function. It will be obvious when they're trying to stay out of the firing line, but to continue doing that week after week, it's not worth their while. They're trying to drum up support to get rid of as many faithfuls as they can. Whereas a faithful would do that. So someone who's constantly voting for the same person for no good reason because no one else is voting for them, you can say that person reliably is a faithful, and that's good information.
I think that differs between early and then mid-stage game. I think early, it's fine, in my opinion, for a traitor to just almost vote a bit randomly, just kind of be a bit inconsequential, where they're voting for someone else who's voting for. No one really thinks much of it. They just think, oh, well, we all don't know who we're voting for, and he's just voted for someone else that no one else is really voting for, whatever. As you get more to the mid-game, it becomes more important to rally troops, to start making sure that you're not banished, because even if people are just banishing people at random, right? Early on, there's 22 of you. Being banished at random, you've got, a 21 out of 22 chance you're not going to get banished that day. Mid-game, you've got 8 people left, for instance. It's a big deal. Like, you don't want to sit there and have a 1 in 8 chance of being banished, and the next day a 1 in 7. All of a sudden you've got a chance of going out, even if you've been excellent at appearing like a faithful and not being traitor-like. If people are just going at random, it's no good. Mid-game, you need to start rallying troops. You need to start playing the game. You need to get people out. You need to cause that suspicion. You need to make people look like traitors in whatever way you can.
No, yeah, completely agree. That early game is a bit, I mean, as much as I'd love to say if I was on there, I'd still have strategy in that early stage. The strategy is essentially
survival.
Maybe throwing out a few alliances and calling people faithfuls just for the hell of it. But yeah, it is a keep your head down, but not too much. But that, as soon as that strategy starts coming in, my feeling is that traitors just don't stick with the same person enough. Is kind of, I think, where the mistake is, because I think that would be when you notice someone is sticking with the same person, that is a good indicator that their strategy, they're not using their votes strategically, and the only reason they're not using their votes strategically is because they don't need to have a strategy because they're a faithful, whereas a traitor always has to have some kind of strategy. Because they need to
work. I think it's harder work being a traitor. I think that's the hard role all the way through it. Constantly masking, constantly watching what you say, strategizing, more than most. But that's not to say the faithfuls don't need to be strategic. Like I've said, you not necessarily going for traitors, especially in the early game, but even in the mid game, it's not as important. It's still just about getting to that final table, getting to the end game.
The sad thing is, being a traitor isn't made as difficult as it should be. Like, as much as it's edited for TV and there's bits you don't see and there's bits you do, the banishment you see most of, and you see who ends up getting voted off, and the traitors aren't they're not found quick enough. If your genuine ambition is to get rid of the traitors each vote, they're never given a hard enough time. They sometimes come under scrutiny it's normally when they've made a real cock up that they've actually picked out. You know, like Ash, who made it really obvious that she was a traitor, or Paul, who just screwed himself over with a silly mistake.
I agree, and I'd like to see more of, you know, like when they do the poison chalice thing, or, you know, like the kiss of death, where they force the traitors to do something like give someone a drink, the person they want to murder. I think they should be bringing more of that in. I've got a cool idea actually that I'd like to float past you, right? What do you think of, imagine the prize pot for the faithfuls starts at 0, but the prize pot for the traitors, if a traitor wins, starts off at the very start of the game at, say, 120k, right? Now, when those pots will only ever equal 120k. So when the faithfuls, or sorry, everyone gets money in a challenge, yes, it puts 10k, for instance, on the faithfuls prize pot, but that reduces what the traitors can win by 10k, right? So imagine you've got this ulterior motive of the traitors within the challenges to want to actually sabotage them somewhat and not get that pot up too much for the faithfuls because it's depleting their pot.
Yeah,
I think that would add a really cool element to the game in a similar way that the poison chalice and the kiss of death does. Because imagine if in challenges, you know that the traitors are not wanting to really let them succeed. You're going to be watching for people that are almost trying to sabotage it. But as a traitor, you can't make it too obvious as sabotaging it, because then people will know you're a traitor. Equally, if you're a faithful that's trying not to stay in the spotlight too much, or maybe you're just lazy, you're then also might be seen as, well, that person could be a traitor because they're trying to, you know, keep the traitor's prize pot high. I think that could be another really cool dynamic to the game, and I would love them to consider something like that.
No, I love it, because do you know what I immediately thought when you said that, which I had this crafty smile come on, and it's like, it sounds good and it sounds like an extra avenue to pick out the traitors, and my first thought was, poor slow ass, you know, Clive. He's just gonna get voted off because he's so rubbish.
Either you're a traitor and you're purposely messing up the challenges, or you're just shit. Either way, off you go.
It's like, poor Clive, feigning a limp because he just can't be bothered to get up, go up the stairs for a 5th time. Get off, Clive. Poor Clive. Yeah. But yeah, I love it, and it's but how, like, again, it's even in that subtle, the way people behave with shields, how they behave with challenges, like it is telling. Like, it really is. There's certain things faithfuls wouldn't do, or the opposite, things that faithfuls do naturally do, where they, as much as they want to build that pot, they're not going to completely outright sacrifice themselves, because the only thing they've got to go for is a share. Whereas the traitor not only has the selfish ambition of being able to win all of that money, but they've also got this double, I need to prove what a good faithful I am, that doubles down on all of this extra effort. And it just means that when you see someone not giving them much of a shit, they're so much more likely to be a faithful. And that's great information. You want to be finding the traitors, not telling anyone that you found the traitors, and being able to eliminate faithfuls in that way also means you can throw out a few alliances with in good faith, that kind of thing. So that's so helpful. What else have I got? So we've gone over.
One thing I wanted to say was this is kind of my take on a main strategy, like a winning strategy for a faithful, right? It is to do and act exactly as Molly did the whole game, right? And then right at the last, banish Harry, right? Imagine if Molly had all along been playing a little bit dumb, really close to Harry. But imagine if she knew Harry was a traitor from the very beginning, like just knew it, but convinced him by the way she was acting that she thought he was a faithful, and Harry just thinks, yeah, I've got someone there that's going to have my back to the end. That's what I need. He's never going to murder her. She's playing dumb enough to not really get banished. No one thinks she's a traitor. No one thinks she's a game player. Imagine the turn of events if Molly had got to that final bit, and when there was 3 of them left, been the one to throw the red bag on the fire, and then get Harry banished and say, I knew you was a traitor all along. What a turn of events that would have been, and what a strategy. That would have been incredible. And I remember watching it thinking, please, Molly, like, is this what you've been doing? But it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
Sorry, Molly, you're getting absolutely caned. I do apologise, but
I'm really sorry. And I mean, I'm even more sorry about that moment where she looks across at Harry and Harry's got that, I've got to admit to you what I've done. And you literally see like everything drop from her face. And it's like, you did this to yourself, Molly. Everyone could see the flags. Even Dad, with 3 of you left, saw the signs, and he took the time to say, I'd rather vote Harry out if he's a faithful and there's only 3 of us left and I could have had a share of the money than take a chance of him being a traitor. So, and you didn't take it. Yeah. But yeah, that if she had, that would have been my perfect bad eggs.
She let her heart decide on that final decision, and that was her downfall. But yeah, that would be my strategy anyway. Do what Molly did. She's got herself to that final table by staying close to a traitor, convincing that traitor that she was convinced he was a faithful. And if you can do that convincingly and then turn at the very end, get them banished, then you've won the game as a faithful. That's how to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the way I try to relate this to game theory is trying to enter every encounter and trying to analyze other people's encounters through both the eyes of, would a traitor do this? Would a faithful do this? As much as people are probably doing that anyway, it's more about using that information, as I said, to build up on it. Like being excessively annoying is highly unlikely to be a traitor trait. You want to deflect. The last thing you want to be doing is just being annoying to the point people are telling you to shut up and you still can't. You still start everything with a big lecture. It's also the type of behavior that's going to get you banished, but it means you're a faithful. But having that, what is the logical strategy for a traitor to be doing this? And because everything a traitor does is a strategy, because they're lying, because everything is a deception, you can strategize what would be the benefit of that, what was the mistake that they made with that, and then taking it back from there. And that's the thing where most traitors are fairly one line in how they play the traitor, even though they might talk about, puppeteering this, and I'm setting fires here and I'm doing that there. And it's only Harry that I've genuinely seen actually manipulate the situation in multiple different ways by changing how he's behaving. When you're sitting at home, I was aware when I'm sitting at home, I can pick it out a lot easier because it's being presented to me on a screen in a strategic fashion that shows me what Harry's doing. But for the people there,
that's a good point. We talk about, I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, that's what you need to be doing. Look at these interactions. What does it mean? What's the benefit for, if he was a traitor, why would he say that? If he's faithful, what's he saying that for? Do you get to the end of the day and just have to recall, 12, 15 hours of interactions? Are you making notes as you go through the day? Are you reflecting every hour on these things and then building up these percentages. Like, how do you actually go about collecting the data needed to start building up and completing that incomplete information?
Yeah, especially across so many numbers. For me, it would be, the immediate thing would be to get rid of the obvious. As I said, the annoying people, most likely to be faithfuls. The people who seem to be taking everything personally, just to identify them as faithfuls. The people that seem to be literally sticking to one line and without any reason, without any support, are just voting for that person again and again. Even if you could be wrong, it's so much more helpful to say your behavior gives you a 20% faithful likeliness, which is 20% more than everyone else. I'm going to focus on these people that haven't said a word, or these people that I can't pick up on too much information.
Yeah, don't hone in. Like, I know we've already said this, but don't hone in on one thing and start thinking it to death and then talking to everyone. Look at what about this one thing, you know. It's a very human trait that when we're focused on one thing, it's very, very difficult to focus on another. There's that test that they done years ago where they got people to count the number of times a ball went back and forwards on the screen, and they had to count, and then at the end of the test, I think everyone said yes, 15 times, and then they were asked, "Did you see the gorilla?" And they're all like, "What gorilla?" And then they showed them it again and said, "Look, now you're not looking at the ball. Clear as day, a gorilla pops up in the middle of the screen, literally between where the ball's going, and just does like a oh." And you know, they didn't see that. They didn't see that. They were so focused on the one thing that, you know, the counting the movements of this ball. And it's the same with the traitors. You know, if you let yourself start focusing on one thing, you're blind to everything else. And in a game where you need to see and hear and understand everything, don't blind yourself. Note down your thing. You know, you've seen something that could mean this, it could mean that. Note down your percentages. Does that increase the likelihood they're a traitor or not, or a faithful or not? And move on. Open your eyes again. Let it go. Review your notes at the end of the day. Get your percentages right. That's the way to play, right?
Yeah, what a quality analogy. That is exactly it, isn't it? You end up bogging yourself down in ridiculous detail that never even gave you 10%. In reality, that was such a small factor that even if you were right that is a traitor behavior, it's only 10%. You know what I mean? They might have done that because they needed a shit. Literally that. It might be that they said that because they just had someone talking about them behind their back and they're absolutely fuming. And they've just behaved in a completely unusual way. Like a good example.
Your eyes to everything else.
Like, do you remember Brian who got called that sheep? And then he got really upset by it, really hurt. And then then people were like, "Why are you so hurt by that?" And it's like, obviously, he's hurt by it. He's allowed to be. It's not, it's
not nice to be called a sheep.
I'd be hurt
unless you are actually a sheep, but then not really understand English language. But
and then but then people started thinking he was a traitor because he's got a bit desperate with it. And it's like, well, you've cornered a wounded animal here. He's trying to cover up that he was upset, as well as also cover up that he is a faithful and he doesn't know how to behave now because he doesn't, how else can he say that he didn't like being called a sheep? And all of a sudden it just fell to pieces and nothing he could say was good. And it was like, but you've cornered someone and you've made them behave differently. Like, that is, how have you not seen that is a very much a faithful behavior, or at least it's he tells you nothing behavior. Again, it's
definitely you attack a wild animal, it doesn't care if it's bigger or what the situation is, it will fight. It will fight, and then people are like, well, that means you're a traitor. No, it doesn't. That's just what we'll do.
Yeah. Whereas if you could manufacture something subtle, whereby you asked someone something in a creative way each day and looked for differences, just something, I don't know, every time someone came down for breakfast, you made a little comment, or every time someone
traitor,
traitor, Like just saying, oh, they didn't get you, did they? They didn't get you, did they? And then wait for something to change. So wait for them to suddenly start being accused. And then you say the same thing. Oh, they didn't get you, did they? And just see if their reaction is different. And then don't draw conclusions from that, but you've obtained new information from the fact that they're behaving differently. And then you can use that to piece it together. So it's like the people that genuinely don't give much away. They're very quiet. They're very introverted. They're very just listening. Maybe like we said, maybe they're sheep and they are just looking for other people for direction. You can still manipulate them interactions with them to try to wait for a change. So you're not getting them to tell you anything. You're just waiting for something else in the environment to naturally change. And then you're assessing how they behave differently. And then you're using that information not to draw conclusions, but to then support everything else that's going on in the environment. Yeah. How does that work with it? Why have they said something differently? How have they then voted differently? And just to see. And it could simply be you establish, okay, so when they're accused, they get upset, and that means they behave differently. And that doesn't tell you much new, but it's the part that is still part of the game theory. It's still part of trying to build up. Would they do that if they were a traitor? Would they do that if they're a faithful? Would they get upset about that if they're a traitor? Does that make sense? Like, there's some things traitors will not get upset about in the same way because they are lying. They can feign upset, but they won't be upset. And I'm not meaning they'll get upset, cry, and get sad when someone gets voted off. I mean, they'll get angry, or they'll get personal, or they'll get fiery. It will be different because a faithful will genuinely be taking that personally as a personality thing, whereas a traitor's lying. So they're just they're putting up shop, and it's a matter of how good an actor they are. Yeah. So what would equilibrium look like? How I was trying to define game theory equilibrium, and my best I could come to is where people are indifferent to voting for you.
Yeah.
Does that feel good?
It sounds right, because obviously we know that's kind of one of the ultimate objectives of poker, is to just make people indifferent about calling or folding or raising, just making it impossible for them to play back at you, being in a state of where you can't be exploited. I think it's obviously it's a completely different context in Traitors, in that equilibrium is about not being banished, not being murdered, but equally not being so not banished that people then start getting suspicious, or so not murdered that people get suspicious. It's like balancing people's opinions of you to the point where, and it doesn't have to be a balance within every single person's opinion of you, but the group overall need maybe a vote or two early on for potential banishment. It's about, there is an equilibrium, but it feels like more like you need quite pure strategies, I would say.
The way I've tried to define it with being indifferent to voting for us is, this is leaning directly into play optimal poker broker style, is where there's no benefit to the other players. There's no benefit to the faithfuls for banishing you, and there's no benefit to the traitors for murdering you. Okay. So they can never deviate. They can never deviate from their strategy to benefit their game. So there's no benefit to them murdering you because you've not got any significant threat, or you've not got any significant value to the faithfuls. Similarly, the faithfuls have not got enough gusto to want to get rid of you as a traitor, but they've also got no allegiances to cause you to be a threat to the traitors. And it's that general indifference that you need to muster in the best possible way by creating enough doubt while creating enough confirmation at the same time. And it is that kind of, you have two value bets for every bluff, or 3 value bets for every bluff, depending on what your bet size is, kind of thing. Forming them alliances. So a good way to set up indifference as a traitor would be when you turn on other traitors, that you show others, you see, well, I voted for that traitor. So it's not a perfect thing, because traitors can vote other traitors off. They can banish them. So that never tells people 100%, oh, he voted for that person, so he can't be a traitor. But it's a good, strong indicator. In the similar way, a faithful not going after shields wouldn't necessarily, that they might just not care. But traitors tend to go after shields because they've always got a motivation to get that shield, whereas some faithfuls don't have that motivation. So it does lean on faithful behaviors, but a traitor is perfectly able to. So they're the kind of behaviors that have enough doubt that they do support the theories. They do allow people to be, well, yeah, there's a behavior, it kind of is that, kind of isn't. Does that make sense? So a traitor that didn't go after a shield is probably doing enough to give people enough reason to think that, yeah, that's a good faithful behavior, I'm going to lean on it. And there's other things, or as I said earlier about not changing your vote. A traitor normally has a strategic reason to vote in a certain way, and that does mean they change their votes. So to constantly go for someone who doesn't suggests an unstrategic decision, which would suggest faithfulness, but it's not enough. A traitor can easily do that.
But again, it's about building, creating that balance, building up. Well, I'm going to be more of a faithful to someone than they think someone else is,
Yeah, and it comes back to that point that I made at the start about being that bad rotten egg, the traitor in the faithfuls, of just how valuable it is to wean out the traitors and then never vote them off, because it just kind of, every part of your don't get murdered game would be made so much easier, and your life suddenly becomes a lot better, and your route to the final is so much more supported if you have the traitors and you know who they are, and you've got them in your path, and you know what your behaviors are to keep them indifferent to you. You're not going to make them a bit, well, like, the best thing is what you said. You kind of make them, you be their go-to, their patsy. You do everything they want, and you stay by their side. But that's really difficult to feign. There gets to a point where that either becomes too hard on a person to stay matey with someone day in, day out, who they might think.
You know what? Let's go to, let's get some faithfuls out of the private sector that have had to brown nose their whole life. It's not that different.
Yeah, of course. I've all been there. But the other side is, if they do get banished, you're kind of left high and dry. And sometimes people can actually see that as well, you were supporting him all along. You must be a traitor as well. That's why you were protecting him. It can show you up, but it is a fundamentally good strategy, because every single final I've watched, and I think I've done 4 now. No, yeah, and I'm on the 5th. Every one of them has someone in who is a yes man.
Right.
Different levels of friend, just overly trusting, and he's generally that overly trusting. I think this Molly in this show, and I can't remember the guy's name in the Australian one, but it was devastating. He just genuinely believed he was just such a nice person. Like, everyone was saying, most wonderful person in the world. People, like grown men, crying their eyes out. He's like, I am a traitor, and I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know what to do, because I can't not be a traitor. I can't relinquish my traitorness, crying and everything. But he still lost, because but he got to the final, and it's every single final has a yes man. But they've been lucky in that they've picked the right traitor, or they've been very smart, but that isn't smart when you then lose. So it must be they've been lucky. But then the other side is, if you can remain, there is normally someone who's also indifferent. You have to be a bit more outspoken and take a few more risks in the final table, so they don't tend to seem that indifferent, especially as when the cameras have got less people to focus on, it's harder to create drama. So sometimes that is a bit more manufactured. So someone who is genuinely indifferent, they'll pick up on something and they'll run with it, or they'll ask them questions in the green room just to kind of stir it up and make it a bit better for the cameras. I wouldn't read too much into Zach's making it close to the end. Even though I said I'm surprised he stayed in that long, he might not have been as outspoken as the cameras made it. That might literally have been the only times he said some things. It might not have been. He might have been a wanker the entire game and shouted at everyone and accused everyone and was quite a sly dog. We can never know. We see snippets of what is an entire couple of days each time. What else can we say about how that fits in? So I've said about protecting your value, doubling it up with. What do you feel about that? Just sending out random love letters, essentially, oh yeah, I've never spoken to you before, but that John over there is.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think, people put a lot of emphasis on sometimes not very much, and we also have a bias just as humans to want to believe the best, so if someone's saying something nice about you and that's all you've heard, you're going to give that way too much credit, because you want to believe, oh yeah, he thinks I'm faithful, and then it makes you feel good about yourself. I'm displaying those kind of honest qualities as a faithful, and I don't really even know this guy, but yeah, he said that. So it's like the whole first impressions thing. Your first impression of someone you haven't really spoke to is a really good one, and all of a sudden you're like 50%, 60%. Yeah, he's definitely a faithful, for just a quick, like you say, just firing out a little love letter.
Yeah.
Let's get some love hearts on the screen.
I didn't know it did that. No, this is what the free version gets you. I don't get that. Yeah, like I see that in poker as, didn't they do a study on how little men will raise a woman who's been flirting with them compared to, they'll try to show a little bit of bravado, but they never go for the jugular compared to, if you're playing someone who's just sitting there grumpy in the corner. I mean, like, there's just people behave differently because they see other people as friendly. I was listening to a podcast, might have been like the Thinking Poker podcast. Do you know when there was that man who went in for the women's tournament and won? And people were talking about that, and there was a few women saying, I actually really like playing men because they're so easy to manipulate at the table. Right. You can get them to show bravado and go all in stupidly, and you can get them to fold things that they would never fold. And it's exactly that. It's based on the same kind of unnecessary relationship. People can't, when you've got so much information coming at you, it's nice and easy to think of, that person's lovely, and then just forgetting about it and basing entire swaths of game.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when, in the Traitors, you're there for 2 weeks they're in there for. You're going to want to be surrounded by nice people. So it's a stressful, pressured environment. You're going to want to naturally, even if it's subconsciously, just want to be surrounding yourself with nice people. And if you're saying nice things about people, they're less likely to banish you. Again, might be subconscious, but if they've not got much else to go by, and someone else is giving them even a slight reason to banish them, then they're not going to banish you. They feel good about having you around them, and you've said something nice about them, which is nice to hear and nice to feel in a pressured situation. Yeah.
So I'm pretty confident I have my good strategy down. I'm pretty confident that the key parts of behavior, whether you're a traitor, whether you're a faithful, is to cast enough doubt to try to, if you're a faithful, you're certainly finding the traitors, doing their bidding for him in some way. So even if you don't become a patsy and you don't buddy up with them, knowing who's their strategic targets and then naming that target yourself before they do, you are never getting voted off. They'll be like, cheers, Mark. Go on, high five.
Absolutely, yeah. It's horrible and it's icky, but you've got to buddy up with a traitor.
Yeah, but the one thing I'm a little sticky on is if you're a traitor, I'm still okay about how you behave. I think the traitors don't ever show enough faithful behaviours. And it doesn't need to be the type that's going to get them unstuck. You can show faithful behaviours like being blasé about the shields without waving a white flag and pissing the other traitors off. You can stick with the same person every single banishment, that kind of thing that you can piece together and then lay them nuggets around when someone accuses you. Well, I've never changed my vote. If I was a traitor, why would I do that? What's the strategic reason for not changing my vote? That kind of crap. Knowing full well that's exactly the strategic reason you're not changing your vote. But the backstabbing, how do you stop other traitors backstabbing you when they think that they can turn you? That is the one bit of the game which is high risk.
Well, it's high risk, but you know what? Harry done it just by making himself so not banishable, and then the other traitors wouldn't dare go up against him because no one's going to vote him off anyway. So the way to do it is just to be this lovable, unbanishable person. And
but John, I'm nowhere near good looking enough, and I'm a bit of a wanker.
You have got no chance then, son.
It's out mine. This is it. So I'm like, this is my strategy. I'm going to be a bad egg. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make alliances. And then I found it. Now, Martin, the very first thing you said is that if you're annoying, people vote you out. Sorry, mate. You idiot.
Anyway, look, I think we've covered a lot of topics, Tain. Is there any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, I think that's everything. I feel super strong about my Traitors application, which I'm going to quickly put in the post before this goes live.
Me too.
Getting there. But it's brilliant. I think the Australian one's just come out, the second season. We're just getting through that. I think there's an American one. There's a New Zealand one, apparently, a Canadian one. So fill your bones with this new deadly information. Hopefully one of these new ones that's come out, they haven't done all of this. They weren't a bad egg and they've completely screwed us over with the strategy, which I thought was golden and well worked through. But also try to use this at the poker table. Like you actually can watch this show and see how badly people behave and how badly people read, and think if you ever do that at a poker table, you are as bad as these people watch. But yeah, my final thought was I watched the season last year, the first season as it came out, and I just enjoyed it. But we've spent a whole year studying GTO, and when I watched it this year, it literally was like someone set a fire inside me, and it was like, this is such a poker game. This is such a strategy. Every part of this has a game theory attribute to it, and people are so bad. It's amazing.
It's awesome.
But anyway, loved it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Tain. It's been a really, really interesting episode. I mean, who would have thought we would be talking about the Traitors sort of coming up to a year into recording episodes for the pod? But it's been really insightful. It's been really fun applying our knowledge and game theory and strategy to a completely different game on some levels, but on some levels very similar to poker.
And just say, we do love you, Harry, and we do love you, Molly. Please come on as contestants when we're on there next year. We won't manipulate you both, I promise.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Like I say, if you've got any comments at all, please do share. We'd love to hear your thoughts and views. And we will see you again next time.
Thanks, everyone. Take it easy.